Hello everyone, I'm the Saxy Gamer. Today we're here for yet another episode of Civilization VI In-Depth, where today we'll be talking about combat. So it's been a long time since I've revisited the In-Depth series. It's been, I don't even know, probably almost a year at this point since I've last done an episode In-Depth, but I was feeling like doing one because I've been looking into some very interesting game mechanics revolving around combat recently, so I figured I'd go ahead and do an In-Depth video on it. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with this series, this is, well, obviously a very in-depth series, so this probably will be a long video, and I can almost guarantee you that there will be people typing in the comment section right now about how they can go on the wiki and read, the same information in 30 seconds, and to those people I say congratulations, go ahead and read it on the wiki for 30 seconds. That's always an option. If you want to go and decipher it yourself, then sure, go ahead, but in this video I'm going to tell you about the various mechanics that go into what causes combat to be how it is in Civ 6, and how you can use that to your benefit, and I'm going to give you my own personal, takeaways and thoughts on how you can use the various formulas and things of that sort to kind of exploit some better scenarios in combat in Civilization 6. Just a reminder that Civ 6 and Gathering Storm and Rise and Fall are currently on sale on my store, saxygamer.chrono.gg, for the next few days, and purchasing it now will enter you to win the Nintendo Switch that has been provided by Chrono. That giveaway will go on for the entire month of September. City Skylines is also on sale along with its DLC, so all of those things are great ways to pick up some awesome games for cheap while supporting the channel and entering yourself in to win the Nintendo Switch perhaps. So check that out, link is in the description below. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is just an overview of, well, what we're going to be talking about in this episode of In-Depth for those of you who may want to skip around and maybe not listen to everything. So first we're going to talk about the effects that you get from positioning, then we're going to talk about cores and armadas, then we're going to talk about the actual formula for damage calculation, then we're going to talk about healing and the effect from having a damaged unit, and then I'm going to go over some takeaways and give you some tips on how you can use all of this information to make it a little bit easier when you're fighting your wars in Civ 6. So timestamps will be added here so that way you can only watch what you want to watch, and I'll put the clickable timestamps in either the description below or in the comment section. I'll pin it in the comment section so that way you can click on the timestamps so that way it's even easier to get to them. So as I mentioned, the first thing that we're going to talk about in this episode of In-Depth is positioning modifiers, and what I mean by positioning modifiers is obviously various things that you can do to your units based on their positioning that can help them gain extra combat strength. So there are three types of positioning modifiers in Civ 6, and they are terrain modifiers, formation modifiers, and stance modifiers. I kind of just made those up based on what, the bonuses actually are, so that's not like a formal definition of groups of the modifiers, but it's just kind of what I've made up. So let's talk about terrain modifiers first. So these terrain modifiers that we're going to talk about right now will only apply to defending units, so you're not going to be able to get them when attacking, but if your unit is being attacked, these terrain modifiers can make it so that you have a much better chance of surviving and you're going to take a lot less damage. So a lot of these are actually pretty straightforward and simple to understand. So there are ideal terrain and unfavorable terrain modifiers in Civ 6. So ideal terrain will provide you with +3 combat strength, and that will be on things such as hills, woods, rainforests, and if you have Gathering Storm, you will also get that with reefs for your naval units. One thing that should be noted is that these ideal modifiers do stack, so if you are on a tile that has both hills and woods or hills and rainforest, you will get +6 combat strength, which means that those are the locations that you really want to put your defending units, because +6 combat strength is a pretty sizable increase and something that will make it a lot easier for your units to survive. That also means that if you see an enemy that is standing on a tile that has hills and woods on it, chances are they're going to be a lot more difficult to kill than they otherwise would be. The unfavorable terrain modifier will make it so that the unit that is on the unfavorable terrain will lose 2 combat strength when defending, and the only 2 tiles that have unfavorable terrain modifiers on them are marshes and floodplains. So you do have to watch out for these a lot more in Gathering Storm, since you do happen to be settled on floodplains a lot more often than not now, just because of, the whole natural disasters and changing the way that floodplains work in the game. Since those floodplains are more prevalent in Gathering Storm, you're just going to have to be careful that if you have units that are defending a city that's settled on that river, you don't put them on the floodplains tile, because then they will be more susceptible towards being killed should you be attacked, and, maybe those units get attacked by either ranged attacks or melee attacks. So speaking of that, that is just something I'd like to mention, is that these modifiers do apply for both ranged and melee attacks. Since it is only the defender that these are applied to, no matter what you're getting attacked by, you are still going to receive these two types of modifiers. The other two types of terrain modifiers do not necessarily apply to only defenders. There is one that applies to defenders and one that applies to attackers. So the one that applies to defenders is known as River Defense, and it gives +5 combat strength to a defending unit when it is attacked across the river. Once again, this one is fairly self-explanatory. One thing that I should mention with this, though, is that in order for this to apply, you have to be attacked by a melee attack. So if you're getting shot by an archer across a river, there will be no river defense bonus. So that is just something to keep in mind, that if you're planning, or if you see that you're going to be getting attacked by, maybe a bunch of archers or field cannons or something like that, you can't rely on the river defense to keep your units alive. You will have to back them off because you won't get that defensive bonus. And the last terrain modifier is honestly pretty niche. It's one that I don't encounter very often, but it is one that you definitely do not want to encounter because it is pretty penalizing. So it is the amphibious attack modifier, which makes it so that your attacking unit will lose 10 combat strength. And this modifier applies to all melee attack units whenever you're attacking a land target while embarked. So this would be like a case where you're trying to land on a beach and there's a unit there that you have to attack, or if you're trying to, say, attack a coastal city from the water with like a warrior or something like that. Those would be very bad things to do. So if you can avoid it at all costs, then definitely, try your best to avoid attacking anything on land with a melee unit that you have embarked, because -10 combat strength is a pretty significant loss, and it's something that you definitely want to avoid if you possibly can. Now let's go ahead and take a look at a few examples that will kind of exemplify these things that we're talking about. So for the first example, I have a scenario from just a little early game thing, running into a counter with some barbarians. And you can see here that both of these barbarians, so both the spearman and the scout, are positioned up on a hill. So whenever I take my warrior here and I hover over one of those units, you can see in the bottom right that it shows that for the spearman, he is gaining +3 bonus from having ideal terrain, so that's since he's on a hill, and the same thing applies to the scout as well. So either one of these units would be equally, bad to attack. I mean, I guess the scout would technically be better just because he has lower combat strength, but just for continuity's sake, I'm just going to go ahead and give the spearman a good old whack here. For the second example, I have something from quite a bit later in the game. So I've got a giant death robot that is attacking a mechanized infantry across a river. So the giant death robot is a bit of a unique unit in that it is able to do both melee and ranged attacks. So you can see here whenever I first hover over the mechanized infantry, you can see down there in the bottom left that the mechanized infantry will receive +5 combat strength from having river defense. Also, since it is on a marsh tile, it is losing 2 combat strength from that being unfavorable terrain. You can also see here, though, that if I go and I select a ranged attack instead to attack the mechanized infantry, it no longer will have the river defense bonus, and instead will only have the unfavorable terrain, penalty on it. The only other thing to note with this example is that although the mechanized infantry doesn't get the river bonus whenever I do the ranged attack, the giant death robot just by default has lower ranged combat strength than melee combat strength, so that doesn't necessarily mean that I will do more damage with a ranged attack, but it does mean that I won't take any damage in return just because that's how ranged attack works. So let's go ahead and just kill this mechanized infantry and get him out of here. Now let's go ahead and move on to the next type of positioning modifier, which are our formation modifiers. So there are really only 2 of these, and they are the support and flanking bonuses, and chances are you've seen some sort of thing that revolves around these bonuses at one point, just because things like the cavalry and the anti-cavalry promotion trees both have things that give bonuses to flanking and support, so you've probably heard of these at one point or another, but now you'll actually hopefully finally be able to understand what they are. It should be noted that in order to utilize any of these modifiers, you do have to have the Military Tradition Civic unlocked, but it is fairly early on in the tree, so in almost all combat situations, you will be able to use these formation modifiers. So the first one we're going to talk about is the support bonus. So the support bonus will provide +2 combat strength per adjacent friendly unit while defending. So this is pretty much just like, say you have a warrior that has 2 other warriors next to him, and that center warrior gets attacked, then in that instance your warrior will receive +4 combat strength from having his friends next to him, and he'll be able to defend a little bit better. The offensive version of this bonus is known as the flanking bonus, and it makes it so that your units will receive +3 combat strength for each unit adjacent to the target while attacking. And just as a little side note, the unit that is carrying out the attack does not count towards the flanking bonus, obviously, because then technically everything would have a flanking bonus if, the actual unit itself was counting towards that. So now let's go ahead and take a look at yet another quick example from a game. So this is actually from the Ottomans Let's Play game here. It's from the save file. I don't think this actually happened in the game, but you can see there is a Vilnius AT crew that is right next to one of my cities that I have a mechanized infantry in. So you can see that with just a single mechanized infantry, I obviously don't get any flanking bonus down there in the bottom right. If I take this second mechanized infantry and move him over, you can see that now I will receive +3 flanking bonus. And then, in addition to that, if I go over here and grab this archer and bring him over, now this original mechanized infantry will receive +6 flanking bonus, which is a nice combat strength boost, and it allows me to just one-shot this AT crew. And now let's go ahead and talk about the very last positioning modifier, which is known as the stance modifiers. And really, there's only one stance modifier, and that is the fortified stance. So fortified, obviously you have the chance to fortify your units. That's one of the actions that you can carry out with your units, and a lot of people don't know what that actually does. So what it does is it effectively just puts your unit to sleep, and doing that will make it so that your unit receives +3 combat strength if the unit has used no movement in the past turn. And then if you use no movement for yet another turn, this will rise to +6 combat strength. The only other thing that kind of utilizes this bonus is the fort tile improvement and the other fort type tile improvements, of which there are a few, such as I believe China's Great Wall does this. I believe the Maori's unique tile improvement does this, but it will provide +4 combat strength and instantly give you 2 levels of fortification, so that's effectively just +10 combat strength. And previously, prior to honestly making this video, I didn't realize how effective forts actually could be, because +10 combat strength is effectively the effect, nice English self, but that's effectively the same effect that you would get from having a core, so it kind of gives you a free core just by having the fort tile improvement. So both of these modifiers can actually be quite useful, and they are especially useful on defense. Actually, they really only apply on defense, not attack, because if you go and attack somebody, obviously you're going to ruin the no movement thing. So that is just another thing to note, is that these do only apply on defense. Now let's go ahead and move on to our second topic for this video, which is cores and armies, since we did just mention them. So cores and armies give you a way to combine your units in Civ 6. So since unit stacking is no longer a thing, that was a thing all the way back in the Stone Age of Civ 4, and it was absolute cheese. Thank God they removed it from the game. So since that used to be a thing, now we have cores and armies, which are another way to effectively stack units, but not quite as cheese and not quite as OP. So cores and fleets will unlock with the Nationalism Civic, and if you combine units into a core or a fleet, that unit will then obviously be made into a single unit, and that single unit will have 10 more combat strength than either of the individual units themselves. You can combine 3 units into armies or armadas, and that unlocks with the Mobilization Civic, and this will make it so that that single unit will then have +17 combat strength in relation to one of the single units themselves. So the actual effects from getting +10 and +17 combat strength we will talk about in just a little bit here when we talk about the damage calculation, but one thing that just should be noted is that this doesn't actually make it so that you'll deal twice or 3 times amount of a single unit's damage with a core or an army, so that is something to keep in mind. Now let's talk about some of these specifics with combining units into cores and armies or producing them. So when you are combining cores and armies, one of the things that actually is kind of important to know if you're doing it in the middle of a fight is that when combining, the final unit will be formed on the tile of the second unit that you select. So obviously when you select to form a core or an army, you're going to select one unit, click the little form core button, and then you're going to click on another unit to combine with. So whenever you do that, the second unit that you click on will be the one that the final core is actually placed onto. With regards to promotions and unit XP, combining 2 pre-existing units will inherit the promotions of the highest level unit, and if they are the same level, the promotions from the second unit will be carried over. So this is actually something that is really important if you have a lot of units that are fairly high leveled. So in that instance, a lot of the time it can be more beneficial to just train up a few individual units that have, obviously no promotion levels because they're fresh and new. So a lot of times it's better to do that and then combine those with that high XP unit, because the high XP units, obviously, a lot of the time they get combat strength boosts from their promotions, and if you combine two promoted units together, then you're going to lose some of that combat strength from the other units' promotions, which is not a very valuable thing to do. So that is something just to keep in mind, and it's something that I practice a lot whenever I play any militaristic game, that I make sure that whenever I'm combining units, I combine promoted units with non-promoted units. If you don't want to combine units, though, you can produce corps and armies outright, and they can be trained directly in any city that has a military academy, or for naval units, a seaport. And this is cheaper than producing 2 or 3 of the single units in terms of production cost. I believe that the resource cost is exactly the same, but I'm not 100% sure, so don't quote me on that one. The other thing to mention is that maintenance cost for combined units is slightly less than the combined cost for 2 individual units, but the exact calculation for the discount is unknown. According to the wiki, that there's a theory that it depends on what era you're in, but I've not been able to find out. One thing to note is that resource cost per turn for things like mechanized infantry that take oil per turn, it does carry over, and there is no discount. So a mechanized army, or a mechanized infantry army will still take 3 oil per turn, which is the same as obviously adding up 3 individual mechanized infantry's cost. And now let's get into the actual in-depth part of this in-depth episode, which is the damage calculation part. So these numbers were found out by a lot of people on the Civ Fanatics forum, so they did a great job with doing a whole bunch of number analysis and a bunch of fancy math stuff. So I will link their thread in the description below, and they were the ones who honestly have the credit for finding all of this stuff out, because there's no way that I probably would have found this out on myself, or on my own. So the formula for calculating damage in Civ 6 is following the following formula. So the damage that will be dealt is, first it rolls random between 0.8 and 1.2, then multiplies by 30, and then multiplies by E raised to the strength difference over 25. So, obviously this formula, you're never going to sit there in the middle of a Civ game and sit there plugging numbers in your calculator to actually, figure out if you're going to kill a unit or not. That would be absolutely ridiculous. Maybe you can. I mean, you're definitely welcome to. But there definitely are some major takeaways from this formula that are useful towards a game of Civ. So for one, we know that damage is random, so even if you, say you attack a unit, and maybe you're not happy with the outcome, so you reload the save and attack again, that can actually give you a different outcome in damage because it rolls random every single time you do the attack. So in a certain way, if you're really into save scumming, if you were close to killing a unit, might actually be worthwhile, because there's a chance you could roll different numbers on the next time you do it and actually get the kill. So I know I've actually done that once or twice on stream, so it's a thing that you can do if you want, just because of the random nature of the damage calculation in this game. But another big thing is that for units of equal strength, each unit will receive anywhere from 24 to 36 damage, and once again, this is random, so for both units, then obviously the strength difference would be 0, so this would just end you up with anywhere between 80% and 120% of 30, which gives you 24 to 36 damage. The other nice thing is that a one-shot kill is possible at a plus 26 strength difference, and it is guaranteed at plus 36. So obviously, if you're at plus 26, you're probably going to be, your odds of getting that one-shot kill are not going to be as high, and the closer and closer you get to 36, the higher and higher your odds of doing more than 100 damage get, until once you hit that 36, then you hit the threshold, and every single attack that you do will be above 100 damage. The other interesting thing with this formula is that there is a lot more variation in damage dealt with higher combat strength differences, so that's just kind of a product of how this formula works. So since it's percentage-based randomness, as you get higher numbers, then obviously a percentage of a higher number is going to be a little bit more, just because of how percentages work. So whenever you get into those higher combat strength differences, you can see anywhere from like a 20 to 30 spread in the amount of damage that possibly could be dealt, which is something to keep in mind, that although higher combat strength will give you more damage, it's not necessarily guaranteed to be more damage, and sometimes, it can be a minimal boost, but sometimes it could be a huge boost. So speaking of that chart, here it is. This was provided by people on the Civ Fanatics forum, as I had mentioned, and to understand this chart, so on the left-hand side, there is the combat strength difference, so you can see they go from 0 to -100 and 0 to +54, And then up at the top there is what the random rolls, so between that 80% and 120%, which obviously will give you that between 24 and 36. So you can see for 0 combat strength difference, you're going to be doing between 24 and 36 damage, as we mentioned. And the rows that are kind of boxed in here are the rows for 10 and 17 combat strength. Now, why 10 and 17 combat strength? Some of you may have already realized that that's the bonuses that you get from forming corps and armies. So for a corps as compared to an individual unit, whenever you are doing the attacking, obviously that will be a plus 10 combat strength bonus in your favor. So assuming that you roll the, we'll say you roll the lowest and you get the 24 as the random, then for that 10 combat strength attack, you'll deal 35 damage. And since defending, you'll have a 10 combat strength advantage over the attacker in that case, then they'll have the minus 10 towards their damage dealt, so you will receive about 16 damage. So that means that you are going to deal roughly twice as much damage as you will take. With the army, you get the same thing here. You will deal roughly 4 times as much damage as you will take. The interesting thing to note here, though, is that although you'll deal, twice as much damage as you take and 4 times as much damage as you take, that doesn't mean that you deal 2 times as much damage as just an individual unit, because you can see for 0 combat strength difference, you'll deal 24 damage. For 10 combat strength difference, you'll deal 35 damage. So that gives you kind of a 50% increase, which isn't quite exactly the value of having 2 individual units, because if it was the value of 2 individual units, obviously that would be a 100% increase, but that is not quite the case. The same thing applies for armies. With the 17 combat strength bonus, then you will have, maybe possibly 47 damage as opposed to 24, which is roughly twice the strength of an individual, or twice the damage of an individual unit, which doesn't quite equate to doing 3 attacks with individual units, which obviously would be 3 times 24, which is, 72, right? Yeah, 72. So it doesn't quite work out perfectly nicely in terms of damage output, but it will mean that your units are going to take a lot less damage in return. And just the other thing that I would like to call your attention to with this chart is, as I mentioned before, you can see as you get into the higher positive combat strength variations, so if we take a look at 17 again, you can see at a combat strength difference of 17, you could deal anywhere from 47 to 71 damage, which is, a spread of 24, which at 0 combat strength, you will deal, obviously, once again, 24 to 36, which is only a spread of 12. So as the higher and higher your combat strength gets, the more variation there is as well. And you can see that, obviously, it gets even worse. So if you somehow had a combat strength difference of 54, you would deal anywhere between 208 and 312 damage, which is a 104 possible damage spread, which is absolutely huge. I mean, at that point, you're insta-killing anything anyway, so it doesn't really matter, but still, the point stands. So once again, let's take a look at just a really quick example just to kind of prove that this formula and this chart actually works. So here I have my modern armor army that is attacking a tank army. So another thing that, should be noted is that really the raw combat strength number of a particular unit doesn't really matter. The only thing that matters is the combat strength difference between the unit you're attacking with and the unit that is defending. So you can see here that the enemy tank has 108 combat strength and my modern armor army has 104. So my attack, if we take a look at the chart, has a -4 combat strength difference, so it should do between 20 and 30 damage, which means that the enemy's attack towards me, their defending counterattack towards me, will have a +4 combat strength difference, so it should do between 28 and 42 damage. Did I read that right? Hopefully I read that right. Or maybe, no, sorry, 28 and 42 damage. And whenever I actually carry out the attack here, you will see that I dealt 21 damage and received 32, both of which are in these expected ranges that we had seen. Now let's go ahead and move on to the last thing that we are going to be talking about today, which is healing. So the first thing we're going to ask is, well, why would you want to heal your units besides obviously just not dying? And the answer to that is that you actually do receive a combat strength penalty for your units not being at full health. And that penalty just follows that it's equal to -10 times effectively the percentage of HP that you lost. So 100 minus your current HP over 100. So if you've lost 70 HP, then that means you're going to lose 7 combat strength effectively. If you've lost 50 HP, you're going to lose 5 combat strength and things of that sort. So that is actually very important because you want to make sure that you're keeping your units nice and healthy because, I mean, you can go take a look at that chart and see what happens when you lose 5 combat strength as far as your damage output is concerned. So you do want to make sure that you're keeping everybody nice and healthy, not just to make sure that they don't die, but to make sure that they're able to still attack to their fullest and that they're able to defend themselves well. So when it comes to healing, you will heal a different amount based on where your units are located. So if you're in enemy territory, then you will heal 5 HP per turn. One thing that is really important with this is that although it is enemy territory, that doesn't mean you have to be at war with the person. If it's someone that you have open borders with but you are not at war with, then you'll still only receive 5 HP per turn. In order to get the friendly territory bonus, you must be allied with the person. So if you just have open borders, it still counts as enemy territory. If you're in neutral territory, you'll heal 10 HP per turn. As I mentioned, friendly territory, you have to be allied with the person. Then you'll get plus 15 HP per turn. Actually, you might be able to be declared friends with them as well. I'll double check and put a little note just to see what happens after, right after I record this audio. And then if you're in your own cities or your own districts, you will receive plus 20 HP per turn. So you can see that just stepping out from enemy territory can make it so that you heal a lot faster. You're going to take half the number of turns in order to heal your units up, which can make a very big difference whenever you're in an attack and the enemy is moving troops over and you have to be, speedy with getting everybody healed up. It is a lot of the times very beneficial to just step back a few tiles into either neutral or friendly territory to heal up a lot faster. And now with all of that information that I just spewed out over the last 30 minutes, let's go ahead and talk about some takeaways. I mean, I guess before we do that, I should mention that although this was a lot of information, this still is, not everything on combat. There still is a lot of other factors to talk about, like city defense, war weariness, things of that sort. So I'll probably do another in-depth video. Oh, also unit classes. So I'll probably do another in-depth that covers some more of that stuff eventually in the future. It normally takes a good while to put these videos together, so it'll probably be a long time, but I will eventually cover that stuff in the future as well. So, our big takeaways from this episode of In-Depth. So the first one about those positioning modifiers is that positioning modifiers can actually give you a really big combat strength boost, sometimes more than a plus 10, which is effectively giving you the effect of a core for free. So as I mentioned, you can get those up to plus 6 while defending. If you're on hills with woods on them, you can get other bonuses from being able to defend across rivers. Obviously, you want to make sure that you're not attacking across rivers or that you're not attacking with an embarked unit on land, just because then you're going to be effectively giving your enemies the effect of a core for free. So although this can be a good thing for you, it also can be a bad thing. So that is something to look out for, is that you're not giving your enemies the effect of a core for free by attacking them in positions that, are a little bit stupid to attack them in. Another big takeaway with regards to cores is that you should try to combine higher level units with units that have no promotions, because otherwise you're really just going to be throwing away XP that you've gained throughout those combats, and you're going to be throwing away promotions, which means you're throwing away combat strength. So if you can, try to make sure you just train up a few fresh units to combine with units that already have promotions. The other thing with regards to cores and armies is that it is often cheaper to produce cores and armies outright than to train individual units. So as I mentioned, the production cost of training a single core is lower than the production cost of training 2 individual units. This doesn't always necessarily mean it's faster, because if you train individual units, you can do it in multiple cities, but from a single city standpoint, it is always cheaper from a production standpoint to produce cores and armies outright. And still, once again, with cores and armies, one thing to keep in mind is that cores and armies will not deal as much damage as 2 or 3 individual units, but they are much more compact and much more likely to survive. So you can't expect to get a, doubled combat strength by combining 2 units. So if you have 2 units and you have the space to just leave your individual units, then it is in some certain scenarios better to just keep them as individual units. The reason why you should combine into cores and armies is because 1, they'll live longer because they'll take less damage, and 2, because there's only so many tiles around a target. So if you're attacking a city, obviously there are 6 tiles around the city. You can either have 6 individual units or 6 cores and armies. 6 cores and armies are obviously going to do the job a lot faster than 6 individual units because although they don't deal, quite double the damage or triple the damage of individual units, at that point you can't have more than 6 anyways, so you might as well do a little bit more damage per hit with taking a little bit less, so that way you're able to live longer while you're attacking the city and you're able to take it down just a little bit faster than you otherwise would be. And the final takeaway from this episode is that it is always beneficial to step into neutral or friendly territory to heal, as it will be 2 or 3 times faster than healing in enemy territory. So, as I mentioned before, if you leave your units in enemy territory to heal, it's going to take forever, and that just means that there's more time that they're vulnerable towards getting attacked and vulnerable towards getting killed before they heal up. If you just step them back for, 2 or 3 turns to go heal in friendly territory, you're going to heal way faster, your units will be back up at full combat strength, and they're going to be a lot less susceptible to dying. So, if possible, I would always recommend that you step your units back at least into neutral territory before you're healing while you're at war. So thank you everyone for watching. I have been the Saxy Gamer. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to like. If not, feel free to dislike. If you're looking for more Civilization VI content, feel free to subscribe. Hopefully you learned something from this episode of In-Depth, and hopefully I'm not going to get too many angry comments down below. There are people like, why are you talking about this for 35 minutes? So hopefully everybody is satisfied. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comment section below. As I mentioned before, I'll probably be doing another in-depth video on like a lot of the other parts of combat that I didn't cover in this video, so keep an eye out for that. But thank you for watching, and goodbye.